Hello and welcome to this part of the Sustainability Weeks 2020. My name is Corinna and I'm from the university group Greening Stuttgart. And I will be the moderator today, or your host for the session with Andras, who is going to talk about food sovereignty. So the Sustainability Weeks for the first time in this year are going to, was planned together with 7 different universities in Baden-Württemberg and is now held digitally. So we're actually now in the University of Stuttgart to give you this presentation. And we organized over 50 different events, and some of them luckily also are in the English language. And today it started. We are now the second presentation that is going to be held in English, and I'm very happy for that because it also gives a voice to international students. And Andras is from Hungary and will be giving us some insights in a few moments. So my name is Corinna. As I said, I study geomatics engineering in the master's program here. And I'm also part of the university group Greening Stuttgart, who is a think tank for spreading and realizing sustainable and social projects in Stuttgart. For example, we organize clothes swapping parties. We have an urban gardening project. We do bread baking workshops. And also, we give a course at the university introducing newcomers to sustainable topics. The webinar today is going to take around 90 minutes, so it's a bit longer than scheduled in the sense that we will add a question and answer session in the end. I would like to collect all the questions and then answer them at the end of the presentation. But if some questions come to your mind during the presentation already, you can use the chat function either on YouTube or on Zoom, and I will collect the questions and then put those questions later. If you have any technical issues during the talk, you can always write a chat to me. I'm signed in under Corinna. And otherwise, I will give you some more instructions at the later stage for the question and answers section. We have a live stream also on YouTube, so welcome to YouTube streamers as well. And yes, I think that's all I wanted to talk about. I will give the floor to Andras and enjoy the presentation, everyone.
Yeah. So hello everyone, my name is Andras Gyürefi. I'm studying industrial engineering, but that is not so important. Food was a very, very close topic to me. I believe that food is the basic for everything, especially when we are speaking about sustainability, even in nature or in the society. Today's topic is food and sustainability. And first we should speak about food. What is food? Hey. Okay, so food is the basic source for life for animals, and humans are animals. It means that we are heterotrophs. We need organic matter, while plants can live only on inorganic matter or in sunlight. What we need from food is carbohydrate, which is basically energy. We need protein, which is the building block of our cells, and we need nutrition, which can control a lot of our life functions, but carbohydrates and proteins are the most important one. Different species developed different kind of strategies to get these carbohydrates and proteins. Humans are omnivores. It doesn't just mean that we can eat either meat or we can eat plants. It also means that from meats or plants, we can choose a lot of different kind of stuff. For example, koalas can only eat eucalyptus, and cows can only eat different kind of grasses, while humans can eat mammals, they can eat birds, they can eat berries, they can eat roots, they can eat nearly everything, or a lot of different kind of things. And humans developed a lot of different kind of methods to get these foods, and this is a very big advantage for us in evolutionary term, because we can spread out the whole globe. Basically, any place where we go, we can find something to eat. Food is a very important factor for economy, society, and culture. It was the basic of economy during the centuries, and this is also the core of society and culture. If we look past societies, food was always the most important thing. And this is also the most important way how we interacted with the nature around us, with the animals, with the flora and fauna. And this is still true today. So how human eaten in prehistory? Humans ate more than 200 or 300 different kind of foods when they had the possibility for it. These human groups were highly mobile. It meant that they migrated in a certain area always. Sometimes they could find berries in this place, sometimes they could find mushroom in another place, and it meant that in this time they were here, and then when they ate all of the foods in this place, they moved to the other area. During this time, this is a very long time span, we eat mostly plants, but meat was a very important source of calories and protein, and when humans had the opportunity to eat meat, then they always try to get it. During this time, there was no real surplus value, and it also connected that people lived in relative equality. There was no big difference between men and women, for example, and maybe there was a very successful hunter, but it didn't mean that he would be the king or the ruler of the tribe. People overhunted very easily, and this was especially true in the case of Australia or in the Americas, because in these continents, animals didn't fear from humans like in Europe or Asia. Humans normally just seen to them as very fragile, very weak beings, while in Europe or Africa or these places, animals knew that humans have a lot of equipment to hunt. And the most important equipment for humans was the fire. Fire could be used for two things connected to food. First was they could burn down whole forests, and this way they could lure animals to the new savanna-like places and help grow the desirable plants for them. And the other usage for fire was to cook the food. It was very important because, for example, in the case of roots, it many times meant that they spent more energy to chew these roots than what they could get out of them. And they could also disinfect the bacteria, for example, from meats. And this helped them to even get more possibility what we can eat. So, but this hunter and gatherer lifestyle changed around 12,000 years ago. People started to domesticate different kinds of plants and animals. Domestication comes from the Latin word domus, which means house or household, and that means that domestication is a process during animals or plants became desired members of the household. This started from 3 areas. It started from the Fertile Crescent. Here we domesticated wheat, legumes, flaxseed, and pig and chicken, for example. It was also from the Yangtze River. It's in China. There we domesticated rice and pig. And also here in Mesoamerica, here we domesticated corn and tomato and sweet potato and a lot of other kind of stuff. This whole process was not so easy, and it was not a one-way street. For a long time, people thought that once once we could start with agriculture, then we stick with it because it was so much better to do agriculture than to do hunting and gatherings. We could just basically sit down and wait until these plants will grow up and until these animals will just multiply. But this was very far from the truth. Actually, hunters and gatherers lived a much more healthy lifestyle because human body was not developed to do agricultural work, and hunter-gatherers had a much diverse possibility to eat. After the domestication of the plants, people usually only eat the main food for the main plant for carbohydrate and the main plant for protein, and normally not so much else. So sometimes this agriculture or animal husbandry revived when the climate changed very much or something else happened. So how domestication went on? It means that if a plant is domesticated, it means that it cannot multiply in nature. This is not totally true. A lot of different kind of species, for example, wheat or rice, possibly can multiply in nature without human help. But for example, in the case of corn, it is totally impossible. But we had to change a lot of things within these plants and animals to be usable for us. Well, why? Because normally only fruits are very good to eat. Corn, seeds, and roots, not so much. So what humans did, they cultivated wheat, rice, and corn because these are very good sources for carbohydrate. And in all of the cases, the seeds became bigger, the germination time more or less unified, and also people had to spend a lot of time with the cultivation of these plants. It meant basically that people spent nearly their whole days on it. So again, it was a lot of time, and people most of the time didn't really do anything else. In the case of wheat and corn, the changes were quite big, but not so big as in the case of corn. Here you can see the zeamay, one variant of zeamay, the teosinte, and this is the original or the wild version of the corn. And you can see that the seeds are much smaller, and you can see that normally there is a cob around the corn, and because of this cob, the seeds cannot fall down, so poor corn cannot live or cannot multiply without human help. But domesticating plants was still much more easier than domesticating animals. Domesticating animals is very hard process. You know probably more hundreds and hundreds of plants that we domesticated, but maximum 20 kind of animals, because animals needed already they should live in a flock or something like that before, and they could accept humans as the leader. And in the changes within animals was they became smaller, they became less intelligent, and they became much more friendly, because this way humans could handle them more easily. And also, so this was how we changed the nature around us, but how this changed us. So people became sedentarian. It means that people settled down. So before that, people, as I said, always went around. And after this, especially in the case of agriculture, so not with animal husbandry, people lived in the same place because they needed the same area again and again every year. This helped to the increasement of population, because shorter time between pregnancies were needed. During when we moved around, then one woman needed 2 to 4 years to have a new baby. But with this kind of system, only like 9 months were enough. And in the case of agricultural communities, more people were always needed, because it meant that they can have more workers in the fields. And women started to ovulate earlier. This is probably because the dietary changes. It was a possibility to store food, so technically it could mean that even in a bad harvest, or if something bad happens, we could still could eat some, but it also meant the possibility, yes, that we can distribute this food. So this is like the very early beginning of class societies. Diseases started to spread. First, in plants, it was much more easy to spread the disease because these plants were planted very close to each other compared to nature, and there was not so many different kind of plants around. So if there was one disease in one plant, it could easily spread on every plant or any kind of pest, not just disease. But in the case of animals and humans, it was even much more stronger, because before this time, animals didn't live so close to each other. There was, I don't know, there was one cow here and one chicken, I don't know, 1 kilometer away. So it was not so possible that the bacteria or virus go to one kind of animal to another. But during these times, these species, humans, cattle, chickens, donkeys, pigs, or whatever, they started to live very close to each other, so they can get new type of diseases, and it meant that probably the whole population could be wiped out. 70%, 75% all of our diseases are coming from animals, mostly from during this time, actually. But still, with agriculture, we had the possibility to increase the population by a lot, and this also made us and this also began the civilization, because there were farmers, there were peasants, there were agricultural workers, and because of the class society, there were people who could do other kind of works. The first kind of agriculture was the so-called slash and burn agriculture. This just basically meant that first they chopped down forests and they cultivated land in this part, because lands under forests are very nutritious. But this nutrition went out after a few years, so they had to start to chop down new forests, and in the original place, the forest could grow back. Maybe in 40 or maybe in 50 years, they chop down the original forest again. But as the population started to increase, these cycles became shorter and shorter, and the forest couldn't regenerate. Because with agriculture, normally humans went into a population treadmill. You had this amount of population, you produce this amount of food, so it seems that you have food for everyone. But then the population could start to increase, so you need to have more food. So you have to have more land, and you will have more people. You need more land, and in the end, you cannot cultivate enough land for all of the people. So your civilization or your community will probably die out or spread away. In the case of slash and burn cultivation, it could lead to potential desertification or big floods. Population cannot be increased above around 30 people per square kilometer with this method. So you needed a new method for that. And this method was with complex irrigation system. For that, you have to organize the construction and maintenance of a very complex irrigation system, because you needed water for these areas. And the social construction which could do it was a state. In this case, the power went to a hand to some people who has the knowledge to create this irrigation system. With this, you could have a surplus value. It meant a lot of things. This is the real start of the class society. It meant what? That workers or farmers had to work more than before, because they had to feed all of the people within the society, not just themselves and their family. So we have farmers in one hand, or agricultural worker in one hand, and we have every other kind of people. We have artisans, we have traders, we have warriors, we have priests, and we have rulers of the land. They normally didn't participate in agricultural work, but still the peasants are not really considered as important people within their society. They didn't have so high status. But the other classes, these rulers and scribes and priests, they distributed the food. Normally during taxes, farmers had to pay taxes to the ruling classes, and then these ruling classes distributed to the food for everyone. When we think about former history, we have to realize that every big name in history, every scientist, every ruler, every artist could only create their masterpieces because there were other people, there were agricultural workers who worked for them in the land. And the other case, these farmers, they didn't have any possibility to make their other talents because they had to work on the land their whole life. Writing was also created basically for agricultural purposes, because this was the kind of the memory of the state. Here, people could see how much food they have, how much grain they have, and how they should distribute. And slavery was also widespread during these areas, and most of the slaves were also participated in food production. There were some who worked on the galleys or worked on the mines, but a lot of them worked on the fields. In the case of Egypt or city-states around Tigris or Euphrates, it was not so much. But in the case of Rome or in the case of Greek city-states, there were a lot, around 30% of the whole society. And in the case of Sparta, it was only one free person, and there were 20 slaves. These slaves have been called helots. They have been humiliated and killed by the Spartans many times. And their most important thing to produce food for the Spartan military complex. But during this time, the most important thing about food is that when it's produced, it has to be eaten. The people didn't produce food for nearly any other kind of reason. They produce the staple crops like wheat or rice, and many times even things like cattle to be eaten by someone. But this will be changed. Not so. This will be changed in the 17th century or in the 18th century in England, because during this time the capitalistic logic of food production will rise. So, okay, I cannot move it. Okay. So England was a little bit special case, although it has more or less a typical agricultural landscape compared to Western Europe, but it has very good infrastructure. It has a relatively strong national market, and here the people they didn't pay taxes normally, or they didn't pay so much taxes, but they rented out the land many times. It meant here the monetary element of food production was given. In these places, there were around the villages there were common territories. In these common territories, even the smallest or the poorest member of the community, of the village, could graze their animals. They could collect fuel for themselves. They could collect mushrooms, berries. They could catch fishes. And this meant that they can live from this land, even if they were very poor, if they didn't have so many other opportunities. And because of that, they also didn't need to work for other people. So this common system was very good in a way. Of course, these people were relatively poor, but they didn't want to have more normally. But they had the freedom to decide what do they want to do with their times. But this system will change soon because there will be the enclosure movements. There were two, and for us the second one is the important. This is during the parliamentary era. within England, and within the parliament were mostly landowners, big landowners, and most of the population who could vote were also big landowners. And logically, they wanted to have more land, but for that they needed a new philosophy. Commons were very a core idea in England, and for that they needed a philosophy from John Locke, and this philosophy have been also used after the colonization of Ireland and after the colonization in Americas, because there also people own land, or they they've lived in land, the Irish and the Indians in America. So the Englishmen wanted to have this land for themselves, and they find the justification in this philosophy on John Locke, because before, based on the Bible, they said that every land is our commons. So John Locke said it was like this at the beginning, but if you mix your own labor with the land, then this land became yours. And he also said that land should belong to the people, land should belong to the person who can make the most of the exchange value out of this land. So the Irish, the Native Americans, and also the peasants back in England, they shouldn't own the land because they cannot make this land the best. They cannot make the most exchange value from this land. So the enclosure movement went on, and the people will lose their common lands first in Ireland and in America, and then they will lose their common lands also in England and in Great Britain. So this helped to increase the output within these lands. So it was from some parties successful, but mostly based on labor, not based on hectares. So it just meant that they needed less people to have the same amount of food. But this is disturbed the social system greatly because people cannot, because people couldn't get food from, people cannot get food from the common lands anymore. People couldn't get fuel from the common lands anymore. So they had to have work from the big landlords or from the factories. Most of the time they had to leave their villages, and they had to go to the bigger and bigger cities. And the shift in agriculture really meant the basic for capitalism, because it meant two things. There was a very big workforce, and also it created a market for that, because before people could get all of the stuff from the commons, or a lot of stuff from the commons, but after this they didn't have a possibility for that. And this is the start when food became a commodity and land became private property. And for many people, both will become seen more and more as a possibility to generate money, first in England, and from this time around the whole world. So if you want to have money from food, there are natural and there are social barriers which could prevent you from doing that. And you have to conquer these kind of barriers. And yes, this is what we can see from this time. Many times this helped us to produce more food, of course, so the population could boom, and generally the famines decreased. But I think in the long run, we would have to pay a very high price for it. So what are the natural barriers? The first natural barrier is the soil quality. Soil, you need to have very good soil if you want to produce a lot of food on it. Soil has a physical characteristic. For this, the most important, how big are the particles? There are sand, there are silt, and there are clay particles. Sand is the biggest and clay is the smallest. And normally you want to have smaller and smaller particles, because this way you can have more nutrients within the topsoil, and you can have more water. This led to good chemical characteristics. If you want to grow plant, you need 16 different kind of elements, and from this 13 you can only get through the soil. The most important elements are nitrogen, phosphor, and potassium. And what you really also need, and most of the time during conventional agriculture, they don't really care so much about it. The soil should have good biological characteristics. When you look on a field or in a forest or anything, what you will see are trees or bushes or grass or whatever, but most of the things are up below the ground, because every teaspoon of soil contains billions and billions of living organisms. There are fungus, there are bacteria, there are worms, there are mice, there are ants, which all of them works on the soil, and most of them are helping to make the soil more fertile. So normally when there are something is growing out from this soil or from the ground, then this plant will get the nutrients from the ground, and maybe some animals will eat the plants, but after they die, their carcasses will have these nutrients within themselves. So all of these bacteria and all of these fungi and all of these worms helps the soil to get back the nutrients, and the new generation of plants can use it. But in the case of agriculture, you cannot really need that. You cannot really do that, because here are the weeds, for example, but they wouldn't die in the same place, or most of the wheat wouldn't die in the same place, because you will get it out and you will eat the wheat. So what can you do with your soil? You can plant some kind of plants, usually legumes, which will help to increase the nitrogen concentration. Nitrogen is the most important for plants. So these legumes with bacteria which are living near to their roots help to increase the nitrogen concentration. This can be useful, but you cannot add more phosphor this way or potassium. And also during this time, you cannot really grow many other stuff here, only legumes. So the other thing what you can do is to use manure. Manure is a biological, and it contains nearly all of the things what are needed for the plants, and they are also very good for these living organisms within the soil. But with this way you cannot add so much more nitrogen, phosphor, or potassium to your land. So if you really want to increase it, then you will have to use fertilizers. The main difference between fertilizers and manure is that fertilizers only containing, for example, nitrogen or phosphor, nothing else. So they are not so good for your soil directly. And with fertilizers, actually you are adding too much of these elements to the ground. In the case of nitrogen, plants can only use around 50%, and the other 50% will get out from your land, usually through water. And it means that with too much nitrogen, it will be very bad for the water quality. It will be dangerous for infants. It can be dangerous for humans. It will be dangerous for animals, and the algae within the water will overgrow, and the oxygen concentration in the water will drop, and all of the other life forms, the fishes, the seaweeds, or the plants within the water will die out. And this is happening in many places around the world. In the seas, there are 200 places which are today are dead zones, exactly because of this. And this is also destroying the topsoil, because the living organisms within the soil cannot survive this so good, because the normal balance within the elements will turn over, will change. So this is the first thing what you can do, is to use a lot of fertilizers. But of course, in the long run, it cannot be the method that you should do, but people are still doing it. And the second thing, what is very important, is that many times pests will attack your crops, and so a lot of you will lose a lot of it. Even today, 20 to 30% all of the crops are eaten by pests. So what you can do here, again, there are three ways how you can deal with it. First is biological, to introduce the natural predators of the pests, or for example, to put repellents within your fields. But for this, you need a very big biodiversity, and you have to be very careful for it. So it requires a lot of knowledge. The second is that you can use physical labor, basically, is to weed out your fields, but this requires a lot of labor. So the last thing, and what is used today the most, what you can do is to use chemicals again. Chemicals, there are three main kind of pesticides. There are insecticides against insects, and herbicides against different kind of plants, and fungicides, these are against fungus. So the first important chemical pesticide was DDT. It was used in the American Army in the Second World War. It was used against mosquitoes, so mosquitoes couldn't spread malaria or yellow fever with the soldiers. But after the World War, they started to use it in agriculture because it basically killed all kind of insects. But this had two problems. The first problem was that some animals or some insects, some pests get resistant to it. And during the more and more generations of these insects, they get more and more resistant. So you would have to use more DDT against them. But their natural predators just died out because they didn't have anything to eat, or they died out because of the DDT. And the second problem was that as it moves upper and upper within the food chain, it will more and more concentrated within the bodies of the animals. So it can be harmful. A lot of fishes, a lot of birds, a lot of frogs died because of it, and later it could be dangerous even for humans. So in 1962. Biologist Rachel Carson wrote a book called Silent Spring. Within this book, she said that if we will use DDT, then every bird and every frog and everything will die out. So we will have silent spring. We cannot listen to them anymore. The manufacturer Monsanto defended that if we don't use DDT, then there will be mass famines and a lot of people will die. But still, in 1972, the USA banned the DDT, and later other countries also followed. In some places of India, it is still needed, but mostly not for agriculture. But still, this DDT, we can say that it kickstarted the modern let's say agroecological movement, or people started to think about how we treat the earth, how we treat the agriculture. So these days we are not using, sadly, less pesticides, but we are using more. We are using imidacloprid, which is a kind of insecticide. We are not using so much about it, but we are using glyphosate, and we are using a lot of glyphosate because, oh my God, the machines are attacking us here. It's something started to print for some reason. So we are using a lot of glyphosate. I will tell a little bit about later why. And using these kind of pesticides are very bad, because most of the times they are destroying everything. They are not just destroying the pests, they are destroying all the friendly or natural bugs. They could kill also other kind of animals, and glyphosate have been shown to be a carcinogen in humans, so it can cause cancer. This use of pesticides is the main cause, or like biologists think is the main cause for the insectogeddon. For example, 76% of all of Germany's insects died within 27 years. So also we can say that this system can be used, but in the long run, we cannot really rely so much on pesticides, but we are still using more every year of them. The other thing what changed, and the other thing what you need, other two things what you need if you want to earn money, that, for example, you want to sell it. And during the 19th century, or before, it was very hard to sell food. For example, if you produced food in Edinburgh, it was so costly to sell it in London that and it required so much energy that it didn't worth it. If you wanted to sell, for example, from Johannesburg, from South Africa, in London, then you needed so much time for it that the crops could go waste. So this changed with the invention of steamboats and railroads and other kind of transportation methods. But with the introduction of railroad, the first crisis happened because in the Americas, especially in North America, they produce so much wheat that the European markets cannot compete with it. So the price of the wheat fall down, that the European farmers, the European peasants were not able to produce in so low prices. So they go bankrupt and they had to go to the cities. They lost their jobs and they became again this proletariat for capitalist institutions. Today, the problem with this kind of mentality that food can travel all around the world is that increasing food distances causing a lot of harm for the environment. In a normal shop, one average food travels 2,500 kilometers. So if you are buying something which is out of season or which is more processed, then it meant that this traveled much more, and this is a very big. It's very, very bad for the environment. It's yeah, okay. So, but the other, and this is really the most important thing about the changes, that the different kind of people had to invent different kind of machines because they didn't want to pay for the workforce within the fields. And also you should kick out the peasants, you should kick out the agricultural workers from the fields because they could work, in this case, in factories. So this is in the end of 19th century. A lot of different kinds of machines will appear, firstly in America, and then in England, and then in rest of the world. With this, today you can use one tractor, for example, and with that one tractor you can cultivate 200 hectares with one person. 100 years before, it was one person only cultivate like 10 or maximum 20 hectares. So you don't need so many people anymore. This also meant again that people from the land had to go away. And this kind of tillage, what you can do with these machines, are very bad for the topsoil. And sometimes that all of the topsoil get blown away from the lands, and this had immense effect, for example, in America. But with you could still increase speak about the rise of the monocultures. We can speak about the rise of monocropping. Monoculture means when you are planting only one kind of crop through the whole area, and monocropping means when you are doing it in every year. all of the things what I said before, the fertilizers and the pesticides are also used very much for monocropping. You can only do this thing because you farmers are using energy slaves, and this is mainly oil. If I said you have one worker, but this one worker many times have 95 energy slaves, so actually there are also 95 workers there, but they are not human, but let's say they are oil. So you still need a lot of inputs. But even with these changes, you cannot get the maximum out of nature. You can only get the maximum out of nature if you change the genetical characteristics of these plants or of animals. And because of this, in the 1950s, after the Second World War, a lot of investment went to the research of new kinds of plants, but only for 6 plants. They were the most important plants from economic and industrial viewpoint. These were rice, wheat, soybean, corn, cotton, and sugarcane. So with this, you could really do the monocropping variant of that. But usually these have been created in a way when they can be only productive if you are using a lot of water for it, if you are using a lot of fertilizers for it, and they were very weak against diseases and natural pests. So you have had to use a lot of pesticides for it. So this was the logic of industrial farming from this perspective, that you needed a lot of capital to produce these very, very high yields. This also led to the decrease of biodiversity. In India, there were 30,000 different kind of rice, for example, but today they are mostly producing 10 different kinds. And also, before you had dozens and dozens different kind of plants which have been planted and cultivated, but now you basically only have these 6 different plants nearly everywhere. And this decrease in biodiversity can be very dangerous because, and this the best example for this is with the banana. These days we are eating a banana variant which is called Cavendish, but like 70 years before, we only eat another kind which is called Saint Michel. But there was one disease which basically killed all of these older kind of bananas. So people had to get a new one, and this Cavendish banana have been created in English greenhouses. Originally, it came from India. So the problem with this, it's extremely unified from biological viewpoint. All of the bananas are basically clones of each other. So if there would be another disease, then it could easily kill all of them. And yeah, there is actually another disease, a fungus, which can spread very easily through soil. So it can easily happen that again we would have to change the banana. But sadly, year by year, the biodiversity for bananas are decreasing. So we cannot know that can we find another banana which we can grow in this amount. So when they wanted to create new kind of species, or not new kind of species, but new variants of the species, what was important for the big corporations and many times for the governments, that it should be good from transportability viewpoint, the size should be bigger, the outlook should be much better. But it was not important that how many nutrients within the plants. So nutrients decreased. For example, the protein, the vitamin C, or the iron within the plants are much lower than 50 or 60 years before. And there is another thing connected to this. It is genetical modification. This genetical modification is connected mainly to only a handful of companies, and it can have some uses, but again, it's very dangerous. The reason why we are using more herbicides than before, because Monsanto created one kind of corn and later the same kind of cotton, which is basically resistant to the glyphosate. What it meant is that now you have to use more. Why? Because other plants, other pests would also get resistant to it. So you have to use more if you want to kill those pests, and then these pests get more resistant again. So you have to use more. We are again in this treadmill. When we are using some, we always have to use more and more. And another problem with it is that most of these seeds are patented, and farmers cannot store it. Farmers cannot use it in the next year, and many times farmers don't use their own seeds, which they had like 40 or 30 years before, because those seeds are not good with pesticides. Those seeds are not good with fertilizers. These are the natural barriers, and it seems that big corporations made big breakthroughs with it, so they could really change the food production from this side. But there were also social problems from their viewpoint, and to understand these social problems, we have to understand the main logic behind food production within a capitalistic system. And this means that you need to have higher profits than every other opportunity within the market. It doesn't just mean that you have to have bigger profits than, for example, rice if you are growing wheat. If it means that you have to have higher profits if you than cars. You would have to have higher profits than iPhones. You would have higher profits than hedge funds, and really every other possibility. So food types aren't just competing with each other, they are competing with everything within the market. So also for food, what you need to do if you want to have big investments, you have to reduce the cost, you would have to reduce the buying price, and you have to increase the revenues, you have to increase the selling price. So food is like every other commodity. In this case, the main thing about it, it shouldn't feed people, it should generate more profit for the investors. And the most important thing, if you want to generate profit, is that you should own land for that. And today, 50% all of the habitable land in the planet, it's used for agriculture or animal husbandry, and mostly for grazing. On the global south, there is an ongoing conflict, ongoing war between small-scale farmers and large landowners. But small-scale is much more productive. 70% of the food what we are eating is produced by them, but they are using only 25% all of the land and resources. And why is that? One reason is because large-scale farms are very wasteful. When you have 100 units of energy, for example, from them, that from all of this food, 50%, all of these plants, 50% is going immediately to feed animals. It means, but you only get 6 units back. Then 9% is going to bioethanol, 8% is going to the waste after consumers bought it, and 15% is going to the waste during transportation and storage. But why still we are using this bigger farm method? First of all, because many times these bigger landowners could concentrate much more power within their hands, but there is also change in thinking, because people thought that bigger farms are better, are much more productive, because they are much more suited to monocropping. So monocropping was really the way how people thought about farming, is that you just put, for example, corn, and you will have millions and millions tons of corn. But small farms are also more productive per hectare, because they can grow a lot of different kind of things. Normally they are not using monocropping, because in their size it's not so effective, but they are using polycropping, so different kind of plants or even animals are like, say, living together and helping each other to grow more. There is speculation in land prices these days, because there were big spikes in food prices in 2008 and 2011. So investors and governments want to acquire more land usually in the global south, many times in Africa. They are buying up more and more land, and a lot of times these lands is not even used for food production. So another important thing is that you want to pay as low wages or as low amount of money to people as it possible. In agriculture, there are two different kind of way how you can do agriculture, basically. The first is capital intensive. It means that big machines, it means fertilizers, pesticides, all of the stuff, expensive seeds. And the other is labor or knowledge intensive agriculture. It means that you have to pay for a lot of workers, and these workers are not only like hand workers, but they really know a lot about the plants within your land, and they don't just know, for example, corn or potato or I don't know, sugarcane, but they know from a lot of different kind of plants. So capital intensive agriculture still will decrease the cost of production, because you can use one person, for example, with a very good machine, you can use one person to cultivate 200 hectares. But in a case of a small scale farm, you can use only one person for 1 hectare. But per hectare, the small is maybe more productive, but altogether the large will be. So, but still, sometimes you need a lot of agricultural workers, and agricultural workers normally get the worst payments in every economy. And for that, you need immigrants, and many times you need illegal immigrants within your fields. There is another element. It's more about like laws. There are international trade agreements, or some government and companies want to create international trade agreements between countries. There is NAFTA and CATA, which is active at the moment, and luckily TTIP has been prevented. And the reason for this are to harmonizing market. It means that if something is, you can do something in one market, for example, you can use one kind of pesticides in the USA, then because of NAFTA, which is between the USA, Canada, and Mexico, you have to be able to use the same kind of pesticides in Mexico or in Canada. You cannot say this is too dangerous for the people there. You cannot say anything. Because of this and for other reasons also, these kind of international trade agreements were very devastating for agriculture, but they could increase the profits of big companies. You also have to change how people eat if you want to sell them more, or if you want to sell them for higher prices. And you also have to concentrate the power in the hands of the market share, within the hands of few companies. And this is happening. For example, in the case of seeds and fertilizers and pesticides, there were, I don't know, 40 years before, there were a lot of companies, but these days we can only speak about 3 major. because there was Monsanto and Signetta, but Monsanto have been bought up by Bayer, and Signetta have been bought up by ChemChina, the National Chemical Corporation of China. So here there is a very big concentration of power. And then within the production sector, you also have around like 10 companies which are producing most of the food that we are eating. You have companies like Nestle, you have companies like PepsiCo, you have companies like Danone, and you can see their products basically everywhere. And also in the retail sector, you don't have so many small shops anymore. In the USA, you have things like Walmart or Amazon. And for example, in Britain, you have Tesco. And also here in Germany, for example, you have Lidl, or you have Netto or Edeka, but not so many. So what you also want is to really reduce the prices. 10 days ago when I checked, like 25 kilograms of corn, the cost was on the market, or if you want to sell 25 kilograms of corn, you would have $3.14 for it. But if you want to order, I don't know, 6 kilograms of Kellogg's cornflakes, which is basically just corn, from Amazon, which is another giant for nearly in everything, then you would have to pay for that $40. It means that it's 50 times more expensive. So if you have this kind of differences, then you really want to sell as much as you can. And for this, you would have to like force people to eat more. And of course, this is happening. We are eating 800 more calories per day than like 50 years before. So yes, we are eating much more food, and we are exercising less than before. So there is a very big obesity pandemic in the world. And if you are eating like processed food, you will have to pay more for every step. Every added step will also increase the costs, and this will also increase the profit rate for the big companies, or the companies in general. But the best way, maybe how you can convert something which is cheap to something which is very expensive is if you convert plants to meat, to animals. So the reason why we are eating so much animals is one of the reasons is because meat eating is much more profitable for the companies. 70% all of the agricultural land today is used for feeding animals. So, so as I said, 50% all of the habitable land is for agriculture, and from them 70% is for animals by grazing, or they are eating the soybean or corn. Animal agriculture, animal husbandry is very bad for the environment for a lot of reasons. At least 15% all of the greenhouse gases is coming directly from animal agriculture. Beef is the worst from every perspective, but all of the other kind of meat or dairy products, eggs are very wasteful. In the case of beef, you need 150 times more water than, for example, if you want to produce that amount of wheat or rice. Meat production increased fivefold within the past 50 years, and sadly, it also led to the disappearance of a lot of different kind of animals, because we just basically kick them out from their natural habitat. Today, 96% of the total biomass of mammals is either livestock or humans. And so it means that there are much more cattle or pigs than, for example, deers. And in the case of birds, it's even like bigger, because 70% of the birds are of the biomass of the birds are basically just chicken. And but why did it change like that? It is because after the Second World War, the agricultural production boomed, because the factories which during the war produced tanks and ammunition. No, they produced tractors and fertilizers and pesticides. So you had a lot of surplus grain, and you wanted to do something with this grain. So you wanted to, there was one possibility: if the animals would eat it up. But animals normally, they wanted to graze within the fields. So what you had to do with it is to put these animals in very small places, very, very close to each other, and then you would have to force feed them. These animals are living in very small spaces. Many times they are attacking each other. Many times they want to commit suicide because they are treated so badly within this animal feeding operation. Even the sound of this is very far from anything what we can call like food. Their waste put into artificial lagoons or artificial lakes. So their dung, their manure, their carcasses, they have been put into these lakes, and sometimes these lakes cannot hold more of it, so they had to spray. They had to spray this manure to fields around them, and this is one reason why my animal husbandry is so harmful for air, because all of these basically bio hazards are just spread without any kind of control. And these generally containing a lot of antibiotics, because these animals living so bad quality of life that they are not resistant to diseases at all, to bacteria at all. So these days 80% all of the antibiotics are within the USA are used to treat animals, even animals which are not sick directly, but they just want to prevent the spread of the disease. So I will speak about 3 different kind of topics which is generated by this kind of system, and how this kind of agriculture system, this capitalistic agriculture system, will change the world. The first topic is about hunger. Today, 820 million people are chronically undernourished. This is the name of that they are actually hungry basically every day. 2 billion people faces serious food insecurities, and 1 billion people are obese, and from that around 1/3 of it children. And most of the people who are hungry, most of the people who have food insecurities are rural poor. So basically they are agricultural workers, they are farmers who are producing food, but they still have to go hungry every night. But we are producing food which is enough for 10 billion people. So how is it possible that still there are so many hungry people within the world? Many times what we can hear is that we should increase the production of food because in 2050 there will be 10 million people, and so we have to increase the food production so much more. We cannot find any other solution. But what we have to see is that people are not hungry because there is nothing to eat. Many times people are hungry, especially because there are too many things to eat. This sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but because there is an overproduction within food, it means that these kind of peasants, these kind of agricultural workers cannot sell their products in high enough price. For example, in a case there is a farmer who produces only coffee. If the price of the coffee is low in the global market, it means that he cannot live from his land because he cannot eat, and his family cannot eat coffee. But he still cannot get enough money from his land because the coffee prices are low. And this is also the case if he is growing wheat, or if he is growing corn, or basically he's growing whatever. If he uses the monocropping method, and many times he has to use the monocropping method because it's forced on him. I will speak about it later. But he cannot get enough food, and he cannot get enough money for it. So hunger is not a question of production. We are producing enough that people could get this food, but this is more like a distribution question. This is more a political question than anything else. The first time when people in the developed countries wanted to serve world hunger was during the 50s, and it have been called the Green Revolution, which was neither green nor revolution. Basically, what it meant that developed countries wanted to export their technologies into third world countries. The most important element of this was a new kind of wheat, which is created by Norman Borlaug in Mexico. In this case, the much more biomass have been put into above ground, so not into the root system, but above ground. And this is called like a dwarf or a small wheat because it was kind of small. This guy won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1970 because it have been said that he saved the life of 1 billion people, and because he supported the Green Revolution so much with this wheat. So during the 60s and the 70s, the production really increased, but what was needed for it? It needed a lot of water, so big irrigation systems have been created. This disturbed the ecology of the landscape a lot. It required patented seeds, fertilizers, and pesticides, so it costed a lot of money for the farmers, and many times they lost the possibility to plant their own seeds again because they had to throw away these seeds because people from the West said to them that these seeds are bad, they are not they cannot have so high yields, they couldn't feed their family, they couldn't have enough money from them. Of course, in the long run, soil get depleted, biodiversity disappeared, and people get sick. In India, in Punjab, there is a cancer train every day, which is transporting people with cancer, because in this region there are so many people get cancer because of pesticides. But in the long run, prices and revenues decreased, so people would needed intervention from their governments. But because of different kind of trade agreements between countries, poor countries or developing countries cannot support their agriculture, and many times they didn't want to. But Western countries are usually doing exactly that. For example, in the case of Europe, if you have a cow that you will, just from the European Union, you will get €2 every day for that. So in Europe and in America and in developed countries, agriculture is very much supported. In developing countries, this is not the case. The revenues decreased because people started to produce so much wheat, they started to produce so much corn that, of course, the price will fall. But farmers had to pay more every year for seeds and fertilizers, and especially for pesticides, so they get indebted. And again, these farmers, mostly men, went to the cities, and this is the time when big favelas and big slums will be created around cities in India, for example, or around Mexico. But from this time, from the 70s and 80s, the global flow of agricultural products will turn around, because before this, mostly developing countries sold their products to the developed ones, and they could get some money out of it. But after these times, the USA will produce the most food, will produce the most sellable food, and in the top 10 exporters of agricultural products, you will find 8 very, very rich countries. And the last thing what I want to speak about is how important is corn in the case, especially of the American agricultural system. Around the world, the thing which we are producing the most, the plant what we are producing the most, is sugarcane. And what can you do from sugarcane? You can make ethanol, and you can make, of course, sugar from it. So both of these things are not so needed for life. But okay, what can you do? What can you make from corn? You can feed animals because corn contains a lot of carbohydrate. It contains a lot of energy. So most of the time within these animal feeding operations, animals are eating corn, even cows, but cows shouldn't eat corn, so it makes them sick. Of course, you can put antibiotics into the cows. They are using it again for bioethanol, which is actually not much better for the environment than normal gasolines. And this is in a lot of products. Corn is really in a lot of products, especially in the USA. In a normal supermarket, every third item will contain corn in one way or another. Like from 20 different kind of bread, only one wouldn't contain it. And the last thing is the high fructose corn syrup. It is basically sugar, but is a sweeter version of sugar. And this is in every soft drink. This is in every dip. This is in a lot of different kind of things. What should be sweet, or maybe in many things which even shouldn't be sweet. So this is the main ingredient of cola. And we can speak about a cola conspiracy in this case, because what the other thing is, what is in cola is salt. There is so much salt that if you are just drinking 100 milliliters of cola, then it should be enough salt for you for one day. But because it's so sweet, high fructose corn syrup is 20% more sweet than normal sugar. Because it's so sweet, you cannot feel that it is actually also salty. So if you are drinking cola, you want to drink more again. And why this corn and why this corn syrup is so cheap? Because of changes in the subsidization system. In 1975, Richard Nixon changed this system, and basically he said that you should plant corn from fence to fence. You would have to plant as much corn as you want, because for every bushel what you will sell, you will get some money from the government. And at the beginning it sounded very good, because the price of corn was very high, and during these years the price of all of the food commodities fluctuated a lot. This was the reason why he introduced this new system, because he wanted to get out any kind of political power from the hands of peasants. So now all of these peasants started to produce corn because they wanted to get all of this money from the government. It meant, of course, monocropping. Many times they are just made corn all of the years in all of their places, and sometimes they are also using soybeans, but basically just these two. And because of that, the production increased and the prices fell again. Today in America, agricultural workers and peasants have the highest suicide rate, and farmers start to commit suicide also in India, and this was not the case before. And this is not because we are not producing enough food for everyone, but it's basically because we are producing too much food, and the people within agriculture, the farmers, the small-scale farmers, cannot get enough money for themselves to feed themselves or their family. So this is the logic of the capitalistic agricultural system. You want to have a big overproduction to push the prices down for the companies who will buy up the food and who will sell in a much higher prices. And this also means a big destruction in environment, in the society, in the economy, nearly in every case. So what do you want and what can you do if you want to change it? First, we have to understand that while we're still living in an agricultural society, because most of the food what we get is from agriculture. Of course, you can go fishing, or most of the time fish is not come from agriculture, but nearly everything else. What will you do if you want some food is that you will go to your closest supermarket and buy some, for example, buy some Miralit pizza, bring it home, put it into the oven, and you can eat within, 20 or 30 minutes. So we get very far from food. In agricultural society, normally everyone was very close to food. As I said, food was sacred. Food was the most important thing within the society. But these days, food is, as I said before, is just another commodity. People don't really think about food. Where does it come from? What should we do with it? And how does it affect our lives? So how we can change this capitalistic system of food production? The first thing, what we can do is engage with food in as many levels as possible. You can create your own food at home. You don't have to go outside and buy fast food for yourself. And you can think about food. Where does it come from? Is it really good for you, or is it bad? If it's possible, you can also grow your own food. If you have, even you can do it within your own house. I'm growing tomatoes, but if you have a small patch of land, you can also grow something there. You can grow it with your family or with your friends. This is a very good way to get back to connection with nature, to get back connection with Earth. You can speak about these issues and you can read about these issues that I spoke about. You can also ask me later or whenever you want to spread that, yes, there are a lot of problematic things within this world, but probably the biggest problem is with our food system, because it's very wasteful. It destroys the lives of people, and also it destroys the environment in so insane ways. You can buy from local farmers. If you agree with their methods, you can speak with them, and maybe you can even help them if it's a possibility, just to support small scale farmers around you. You can decrease your food waste. You should only buy food that you are 100% sure that you will eat, and you can organize, for example, food sharings. Food sharing is like a system within Germany that supermarkets, for example, would throw out their food that would be expired soon, but sometimes they are giving it to people, and then they can give this food away. They can share this food with other people. You can also go vegan, or you can drastically decrease the meat or the dairy consumption of yours. And this way you will really save a lot about the earth, and you can save these animals from unnecessary suffering. But we also need systematic changes within the system, because without that, if only you change your life, it is just like putting some fresh water into an ocean of oil. So what we also need is to change everything which is connected to the food production, not just around us, but even in the other side of the world. So this thing, how we can, or like the political goal, what we should do, we can call it, for example, food sovereignty. And this is mostly connected to small scale farmers who are producing many times much more sustainable ways. But they are endangered. Big corporations and big farmers are buying up their lands, and they are buying up free lands around the world. So the possibility for them to get new land and produce in sustainable way, which is good for the community also and good for the people, is their chances are getting less and less, because land became an investment, and this land became expensive. In Europe, there is a movement called Reclaim the Fields, which the main agenda for them is to make land accessible for everyone. But these kind of organizations are all around the world. In every country, there are organizations like this. And there is one very important organization, La Via Campesina, the Peasant's Way. And this is everything about small-scale farmers. This is the organization which created the term food sovereignty. It has 2 million members in 81 countries. And yes, in 1996, they created this idea of food sovereignty. In 2007, within the the first Global Forum of Food Sovereignty, they gave this description of it. Food sovereignty is the right of peoples to eat healthy and culturally appropriate food produced through ecologically sound and sustainable methods, and the right to define their own food and agriculture system. It puts those who produce, distribute, and consume food at the heart of food systems and policies rather than the demands of markets and corporations. It defends the interests and inclusion of the next generation. Food sovereignty prioritizes local and national economies and markets and empower peasants and family-driven agriculture and food production, distribution, and consumption based on environmental, social, and economical sustainability. So these are like the political goals. But one method how you can achieve it is through agroecology. Agroecology sees the nature, sees the farm, the food system in a much different perspective than conventional farming. It sees farms as an ecosystem where there are a lot of different kind of parties. There are animals and there are trees, there are plants, and there are microorganisms, and all of them are important for the farm. And because of this, it promotes biodiversity instead of using of chemicals. The FAO, the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, described it as a scientific discipline, a set of practices, and also a movement. It can achieve much higher yields than conventional agriculture per hectare, and this is very much knowledge and labor intensive, so it means it can reverse the outflow from the rural areas to the cities, and people could go back to the land, and they can work in the land, because probably for higher wages than before, because these days because of automatization, jobs are disappearing also from cities. Agroecology doesn't have a strict set of rules. It is basically because something can work in some place but wouldn't work in another place. It centers on food production that makes the best use of nature's goods and services while not damaging these resources. It also improving soil quality, and it helps store carbon in the soil. This way it can really decrease the possibility of global warming. So agroecology is a very good way how we should look on, or how we should make agriculture globally. And there are global successes in every part of the world, especially in India, especially in Africa, but also in India. But in Africa, it can reverse the desertification. It can help the soil to bind more water into it. So in the long run, it can really help feed the whole world. Now we can change what kind of method would we support. Would we support, for example, agroecology, which centers the nature, centers the people into the middle of the food system instead of profit and instead of money? I think for the long run, if we want to have a sustainable food system, if we want to feed all the people, if we want the farms to give jobs to people, if we want to reduce the poverty around the globe, that we have to choose agroecology, we have to choose more just and the more decentralized food system. We should stop the thinking that that profit is more important than nature. Profit shouldn't be more important than nature anymore, and profit shouldn't be more important than people anymore. We should really change this food system. And I think now we have the possibility for it, because agroecology and other kind of sustainable methods are spreading everywhere. We should support them as much as we can. Okay, and this is the end of the presentation. Thank you for everyone to listen through this. For me, it was a bit hard to speak so much. I hope you still have a lot of time to ask me questions, because and I hope I can answer them, or if anyone else can answer them, it's also good. So thank for you again. I hope you enjoyed it.
Yes, thank you very much, Andras, for these strong words and the insights that you gave us on food production and food markets today. We are now continuing to our questions and answers. I will introduce you to a few rules. You will now be able to raise a question if you're interested. You can either write in the chat your question. You can also write just a star if you want to speak up, and then we can unmute you and you can ask your question. For this one, if you're like using Zoom, you will never be like, your picture will not be shown onto our YouTube stream, so only your voice can be heard, but otherwise you're anonymous. And you can also put more questions into the YouTube chat. We already got 2 questions there. And Andras will be happy to answer any of those, I'm sure. Yes, and also if you're using Zoom, down in the lower bar, you can see the raise your hand symbol. You can click on it, and with that, you can also symbolize us that you would like to ask a question.
Yeah, and we only have maximum 30 minutes.
Yes. So I would say we start with the first question from YouTube.
Wow.
It is going to be a long one, and it is from Yannis. And he first writes, there seems to be a radicalization on our way we look on food, or especially our diet. With the vegan movement being there for quite some time now, there seems to be an uprise in the so-called carnivore diet, with people like Sverich, a more or less famous anti-vegan on YouTube, or even Jordan Peterson, Canadian psychologist, who is also pushing the carnivore diet. How do you explain this phenomenon, and what is your stance on it?
Okay.
Andras, do you have an opinion?
I have an opinion why is carnivore diet. I think it's basically because veganism became very relatively popular, but it has quite a big media coverage. But this media coverage is still many times very negative. So a lot of people wanted to make like a counter movement against it. So people started to say, okay, we don't need to eat any kind of plants anymore. We can live only on meat. For example, in the case of Jordan Peterson, who have been hospitalized partly because of his carnivore diet, he only eat beef, salt, and water. He didn't get anything else. I think this is the main reason. I don't think carnivore diet is like, it's so good for big companies. I don't really think like big companies pushing so much carnivore diet as it is, because I think most of the people know that this is quite bad for your health. But yeah, like the pushing the meat consumption in general into the front, it's a very serious thing, especially in developing countries where eating meat seems like a thing that you are wealthy. It seems as really like a luxury product. So a lot of people want to consume more meat. This is the reason why in Europe, or even in America, we are not consuming so much meat, or especially so much beef anymore. But still, the global consumption of meat is rising, sadly. But I think if we change the whole system of production of food in a lot of ways, then we can also decrease by a lot of meat consumption worldwide. Okay, I don't know, was it an answer, or do you need something else? But if you need something else, yes, I can speak about it.
So Yannis, feel free to ask another question if the question wasn't answered. I will go to one from Zoom now, because there are a lot of questions about veganism here. So Let's start with the easier question. Where can I find ways to veganism if I want to live a really sustainable life? This is a question from Manuel.
Okay, where can I find ways to veganism? I really don't know what you mean by that. You want to have you want to live in a farm or something like that, or you want to have some kind of guide how you can do it. How can I go vegan? Yeah, okay. Now I understand it better. I think there are a lot of possibilities for it, and yes, and again I say it that veganism is much more sustainable than eating meat or dairy product. This is very important. I think there are a lot of different kind of ways how you became vegan. I can even imagine that the questioner can answer to this question better than me, the person who asked this question. But I think we can generally say that going vegan, or for example in my case, because you can imagine that I'm vegan, it's not so hard to go vegan. You can easily change all of your diet into veganism, and you don't, if you watch some videos, if you read a little bit about, or you speak with other vegans, and there is a very friendly vegan community. Not everyone is friendly, but most of the people are friendly within it. That what you should eat, how you should eat, then you wouldn't have any deficiency. You can live a totally normal, and in most of the ways even better life than if you would be in an omnivore in this sense. For example, in my case, I lost 15 kilograms because I went vegan, or maybe even more, and my health became much better. But I think, or in my case, you shouldn't be afraid of going vegan. It's much more easier than how you would imagine, or in my case it was much easier. I don't know if it's a good answer or not, but anyone can tell their own opinion about it. So if you want, you can also say your own opinion, or you can give us some tips if you would like.
Okay. If you want to say something, Manuel, then just write us something and you can speak up. Otherwise, so you've kind of criticized capitalism today a bit. And there is another question coming in from Jan via YouTube, and he is asking, what is your opinion on the capitalist accumulation of vegan nutrition and the vegan movement in general?
The capitalistic accumulation of vegan nutrition. Can you make it a bit more precise? What does it mean that vegan nutrition? But okay, so about the vegan movement, that as I said, I'm a vegan. I support the vegan movement in general. I think it's a very important to become vegan, or at least decrease by a lot your meat consumption and dairy consumption. But the problem alone, I think that only if we going vegan and we wouldn't change the capitalistic look on food, it can still lead to a lot of disasters within the environment. And in the case of humans, it still would leave a lot of people moneyless. It would still leave a lot of people landless. So just by going vegan, I think we wouldn't solve all of the problems connected to our food system. It's one step, and it's many ways it's an important step, but it's not the only step. And from this perspective, I would like to criticize the vegan movement, because many times they are not really speaking about it. I can understand their logic, because they want to put the animal suffering into the middle of their message, and this is very good, and I can support it. but we have to see that the current food system is very bad from another perspectives also. And yes, as I said before, just by reducing meat consumption, there would still be hungry people around the world if we don't really improve the distribution of money, the distribution of land as many hands as it possible. I think this is the main thing. Maybe I didn't even speak enough about it, but we should aim to give much more land and much more to small scale farmers, and we would have to put much more money into producing different kind of crops in not only in rice or soybean or whatever, but to improve all like the quality of all kind of crops around the world, but not through this logic of very much like putting more fertilizers or something into it, but with improving also the biodiversity. We have a lot of seeds around what we didn't store or we didn't use. We could use them to improve the quality of our food. Okay. Sorry if it was a bit out.
I think it's good if you answer them long and extensively. We have a last question from Sarah, also from Zoom. You talked about that we need better quality and maybe more higher wages for the farmers. So Sarah is asking, how can we educate people that they are willing to pay more for food? Or should the governments force higher but fair prices?
Okay, so yeah, I think that the government should. It would be better if governments would for example put tariffs into a lot of kind of food. One of the reasons why we can have so cheap food, because basically the tariffs disappeared, and this also led to that many times one kind of food is only produced in several countries. For example, in the case of Europe, most of our vegetables and things like that is coming from Spain. They are probably not really produced in anywhere else. And okay, the European Union is a special case, but yeah, like global tariffs are disappearing. This is I think it would be an important thing, especially for developing countries, to defend their own agriculture with tariffs, and this way the farmers could get higher prices for their products. I don't really think. I mean, you can speak about this to people that actually when you are buying something very cheap, this actually has a lot of external costs. So when you are buying, I don't know, a can of beans only for 50 cents, then probably, or when you are buying, I don't know, something like a burger in a McDonald's, then you are paying a lot of other costs, like the cost of air quality, the cost of water quality, the disappearing of soil, but you don't pay it by money, but you are paying it like disappearing of these things within your life. This is like the external cost, which is paid by the community and not paid by the companies. So and the other thing is, I don't really think that governments should make the prices higher. It would be much better if the governments, if they have the possibility, they subsidize the small scale farmers much better than before. As I said, for example, in the case of corn, that a lot of money is going to corn in America, but there is nearly no money going to agroecological farmings, for example. And as I said before, like 99% all of the money for creating new variations of species is going to these 6 crops. No money is going to agroecological. What is the investments? Not investments. What is the word? I asked it from you yesterday. No. Whatever. So nearly no money is going to to improve the quality of other kind of crops. So I think government can have a big big opportunity and a big responsibility to help to sustain a better system. Maybe it's not just like the personal in our level. Yes, we should spend more money on it. Actually, we are spending generally much less money on food than before. Like in a 50 years before, we spent like 1/5 of our income, but these days we are spending only 1/10 of our income on food. But I don't really know, like, we can educate people, we can speak about these issues with them, and maybe we can convince them. But again, I think we should change the whole system. And in this case, people wouldn't have to pay directly more for for food, but still everyone would get enough. Okay, I don't know, was it an answer, or you could understand it or not? Maybe I'm a bit disoriented now. Sorry.
Okay, thank you very much, Andras. I think that was all for today. No more questions. So thank you for speaking for 90 minutes. That's amazing. That's long. And thank you to our spectators, to our audience, for keeping up with us for this long time. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the presentation or the webinar from Andras today. And of course, there are more events happening during the next 1.5 weeks here from the Sustainability Weeks 2020. And we have also some more English-speaking events. Now the next one will be on Sunday. It's a do-it-yourself vertical gardening workshop with the Inselgrün. And then the next one after that will be on Thursday. There will be short presentations about defining the roles of sustainability in our university community. So feel free to check in there as well. And all the events you can find on our website, hochschule-n-bw.de. And yes, I say goodbye.
Okay, goodbye everyone. Thank you everyone for listening. And yeah, maybe we will see each other again in this way. Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye, Nuri.